unequal lifespan case. This case is just like the paraplegia case, except we must choose between saving C, who would live 5 years of high quality, and D, who would live 25 years of the same high quality. 5 years versus 25 years. Benefit maximizers, of course, would say, save D straight away. That's how you get the most benefit. Living life of a high quality is a benefit. If you save the person who will live 25 years, you get 5 times as much benefit. But many others, including me, also say, in this case, save D straight away. By straight away, I mean not after some randomizing process, a coin flip, or something like that. I venture that many of us hold something like this. When we must decide between using a scarce resource to save one person or another, quality of life considerations ought to have no role, at least if the quality for each person would be decent, but length of life considerations can sometimes legitimately come into play. Here's what I'm going to do, or try to do, in this presentation. First, I'm going to go into a bit more detail, brief detail, about what benefit maximizing views are like in health resource allocation. Then I'm going to introduce an anti-benefit maximizing argument, one sketched by Francis Cam, a philosopher, and applied to our cases. Then I'm going to talk about Cam's equal respect argument, which allegedly supports giving equal chances in the paraplegia case, but saving straight away the person who would live longer in the unequal lifespan case. I'm going to criticize the equal respect argument. I'll then introduce a broadly Kantian account of respect for the dignity of persons. I'll apply this account to our cases. I'll consider a Camian objection or reply, sort of objection that Francis Cam would raise, and then I'll conclude by coming back to where we started, to the notion of benefit maximizing. Main aim here is this, is to show that a Kantian account of respect for the dignity of persons progresses farther than an approach discussed by Cam towards justifying the giving of equal chances in the paraplegia case and the saving straight away of the person who would live longer in the unequal lifespan case. I wouldn't be surprised if some of you have the following reaction to the paraplegia case and the unequal lifespan case. These cases are really, really abstract and idealized. There's very little information, context is absent, and so forth. Yes, that's true. The cases are idealized, but I think that the issues that they raise have a profound practical importance. So if we really think that it would be morally wrong to save the person who would live a lot longer straight away in the unequal lifespan case, then we're going to have, I think, good reason to think that we shouldn't privilege people for, say, getting a life-saving kidney on the basis that they would live a lot longer than other people who are candidates for the kidney. Rationing decisions are made on the ground every day, and an obvious example of those decisions have to do with organ allocation. And assuming that we value consistency in our thinking, how we come down on abstract cases like this is important for policies in the real world that we can or cannot endorse. Okay, so let me talk briefly about benefit maximizing. Here's a measure of health benefit. A measure of the health benefit of a drug, a surgical operation, a health intervention. It's called a quality-adjusted life year. So the measure of benefit is to look at how many quality-adjusted life years are produced by a given intervention. This isn't a philosopher's fiction. These are used on the ground in the United Kingdom, for example. One quality-adjusted life year is equal to 1 year in full health. And 0.5 qualies, we can say, harmonizing with what's done on the ground, is equal to 1 year of life as an otherwise healthy paraplegic. So if you save an otherwise healthy paraplegic for 2 years, then you generate 1 quality, the same amount as if you save someone in full health for 1 year. That's the way qualities work. Now, benefit maximizers are concerned with getting the most qualities for the money. But let's leave money out of it. In our cases, we're going to assume that treatments cost the same for each person. So benefit maximizing in our cases is equivalent to maximizing qualities produced. Here are some assumptions we make following CAM. First, health-related quality of life, as expressed in how many qualities a person would gain in a year's time, correlates positively with quality of life tout court. So we're assuming that if you have better health-related quality of life, then you have greater well-being. That's an assumption that we're making, Cam is making, and I'm making here. Next, all the people in our examples will spend the rest of their lives as mentally competent. So, for example, no one's going to spend a year of life in a coma. Okay, so benefit maximizers would save the non-paraplegic straight away in the paraplegic case. CAM sketches an argument that's supposed to generate a different conclusion, and indeed would generate a different conclusion. She says the following. It might be said that it may be morally more important to give someone the basic goods that help him avoid the worst evil and make his life one worth living than to give him the goods which admittedly double the overall value of his life. Another way of putting this point might be that it is having a life worth living that is of crucial significance. And if paraplegics can have this, they have what is relevant to deciding to give equal chances for life, given that each individual, the paraplegic and the non-disabled person, from his personal point of view, wants to be the one to have a life worth living. So, in cases like the paraplegic case, where two persons are attempting to secure a life-saving resource that can go only to one, and both would, if saved, have a future life worth living, the two ought to have equal chances of obtaining the resource. That's what the moral importance argument says. It's not hard to see that the moral importance argument actually implies that we should give equal chances in both of our cases. Look, in the paraplegic case, you have two people who both want to live and would have lives worth living if given the resource. In the unequal lifespan case, you have two people who are trying to get saved, literally, and who would have lives worth living if they got the resource. 5 years of life is shorter than 25 years of life, but surely it is life worth living, at least according to our assumptions. So the moral importance argument implies that in both cases, each candidate should get a chance equal with that given to the other. Now, some people are comfortable with the implications of the moral importance argument, including Cam and I. We think that the implications of the moral importance argument are not acceptable. That it wouldn't be wrong to save the person who would live longer in the unequal lifespan case straight away. Now, Cam offers the equal respect argument as a possible ground for the position that, morally speaking, we can save the one who will live significantly longer in the unequal lifespan case while maintaining that there is significant moral reason to give equal chances in the paraplegia case. So the equal respect argument is supposed to generate what people like me want. A way to say, no, it's wrong to save the non-paraplegic straight away, but it's okay, morally speaking, to save the person who would live longer straight away. Okay, here's the argument. First premise is that each person is entitled to equal respect and, at least for purposes of an impartial distribution of scarce resources, equal concern. Now, Cam doesn't say a lot about this premise. Appeals to equal respect and concern are very common in normative ethics. And I think she relies on a kind of intuitive understanding of what this principle amounts to. The next premise is that each person is entitled to equal respect and concern implies that synchronic properties, for example, whether one is or will be paralyzed, should not bear on selection for scarce resources. However, says the third premise, denying a person a scarce resource on the basis that he will not live as long as another individual who is a candidate for it does not amount to allowing synchronic properties to bear on selection for scarce resources. Therefore, denying a person a scarce resource on this basis does not fail to give him equal respect and concern. I'm going to talk about the second and third premises because, at least to me, they are not obvious. It's not straightforward what they mean. So in blue there, you have the second premise. Cam invokes the notion of synchronic properties. What's a synchronic property? Well, one thing she says about such properties is that they determine the character of a person's time alive. An example that she uses is paraplegia. This property would include components of the life of the paraplegic in virtue of paraplegia. One such component would obviously be not being able to walk. Another component would be perhaps having to use a side entrance to a certain building rather than the main entrance. Cam insists that length of life is not a synchronic property. And she says this: if selection is based on health-related quality of life, then paraplegia would bear on selection. Why? Because paraplegia obviously influences health-related quality of life. Those numbers and qualities vary depending on whether one is paraplegic or non-paraplegic. So choosing the non-paraplegic straight away in the paraplegic case runs afoul of this premise. It violates this premise. In blue is the third premise of the argument. The premise says denying a person a scarce resource on the basis that he will not live as long as another individual who is a candidate for it does not amount to allowing synchronic properties to bear on selection for scarce resources. Why not? Well, it seems that Cam wants to say that the number of years a person will live is simply not one of his synchronic properties. Why? Well, one thing that at times she suggests is that future lifespan does not partly determine the character of a person's time alive, and so is not a synchronic property. But I don't think that that's convincing. I mean, suppose that you learn that you have 2 years to live. Wouldn't you perhaps change your life? Maybe you visit Machu Picchu, or make up with a sibling you were in a fight with, or work more, or maybe work less. It seems that future lifespan can partly determine the character of a person's time alive. I have a lot more to say about what can means about synchronic properties, but I think a charitable interpretation is what we need to arrive at to get going in this talk. So maybe a person's synchronic properties are ones that have two characteristics. They determine partly the character of the person's time alive, and they're such that she might have them for a longer or shorter duration. I don't think it's plausible to say that I can have my future lifespan for a longer or shorter duration. If my future lifespan is 10 years now, then in 2 weeks it's 10 years minus 2 weeks. So maybe that's what Cam is on about here. If that's how you define a synchronic property, whether a property is synchronic then depends on context. So you can imagine having a susceptibility to be infected by a certain bacteria, okay? Now, whether that property partly determines the character of your time alive may well depend on where you live. I mean, if those bacteria can't survive in cold climates, then in cold climates, that's not going to be one of your synchronic properties. Okay, so let's turn to criticism of the equal respect argument. On the left of the screen is the second and third premise of the argument and the conclusion, just so you can glance at them if you wish. First thing I want to say is this. If true, the premises yield this conclusion: saving straight away the person who will live a longer rather than a shorter time does not fail to give appropriate respect and concern for both as a result of holding someone's synchronic properties against him. But the premises don't generate the argument's conclusion. They don't show that saving straight away the person who will live longer is consistent with giving appropriate respect and concern for both. The equal respect argument, I think, contains a gap. For all its premises imply, we might fail to show someone in our cases equal concern and respect by holding some non-synchronic property he has, for example, his expected lifespan, against him. I think this: it can be inconsistent with giving equal concern and respect to persons to choose some over others for life-saving treatment on the basis of certain non-synchronic properties. Let me illustrate that through an example. Suppose that in a certain context, blood type is a non-synchronic property. So in this context, for example, it doesn't partly determine the character of persons' lives. 3 candidates are vying for a scarce life-saving treatment. One candidate with blood type O positive, and the other 2 with type AB negative. Each would live 10 years of the same high quality if treated, and all else is equal between them. But we are able to treat only either the 2 with type AB negative blood or the 1 with O positive. And we choose to treat the one solely because he has type O positive blood. Now it seems obvious to me that we have not treated treats persons with equal concern and respect. And that's because we based our treatment in a certain way on a non-synchronic property that they have. Now, I used a 2 versus 1 sort of scenario here, but I could get the same conclusion with a 1 versus 1 case. CAM just doesn't provide any rationale for thinking that a principle of equal respect and concern would countenance basing one's choice of whom to save on the non-synchronic property of future lifespan. Yeah, maybe future lifespan is a non-synchronic property, but people can still be disrespected based on appeal to their non-synchronic properties. She leaves us wondering, what's the difference between privileging someone for life-saving treatment on the basis of expected lifespan and privileging someone for such treatment on the basis of blood type? And that's not a good thing to be left wondering, because we think it's clearly disrespectful to privilege someone on the basis of blood type, as in the case that I presented. Okay, so now to the positive part of the talk. Can we find grounds for holding that giving the 2 equal chances in the paraplegia case and saving the one with greater life expectancy in the unequal lifespan case are in accordance with the principle of respect for persons? That's what people like me want to do, or at least make progress toward doing. Now, Kant's work might seem to be an unlikely place to find inspiration. Why? Well, because as I alluded to before, there is pretty good reason to believe that he would favor giving a person who could live 5 years and a person who could live 25 years equal chances on the basis of the idea that all persons have unconditional and incomparable worth, the latter implying that we can never say that one person has more worth than another. We can talk about that later if you like. So I'm not claiming that the Kantian, or broadly Kantian, or if you will, Kant-inspired approach that I take would be endorsed by the sage of Königsberg himself. He may roll his eyes at it, or worse. Okay, so I'm not trying to capture what Kant himself would say. But I think a Kantian approach has promise. Okay, so what I'm going to do is introduce a Kant-inspired account of respecting the dignity of persons. It's an abridged version of something I developed in my book, How to Treat Persons. This says that dignity is a special status that persons possess by virtue of having the capacities constitutive of personhood. And this status is such that, 1, a person ought not to use another merely as a means. And this first aspect of person's special status is lexically prior to the following aspect. It has to be satisfied before you can satisfy the next aspect. If a person treats another in some way, then she ought to treat him as having unconditional, preeminent value. An agent's treatment of a person respects the dignity of that person only if it accords with the special status just described. If the agent's treatment fails to respect another's dignity, it is pro tanto wrong. So what I do here is I try to develop a necessary condition for respecting the dignity of persons. I'd like to point out that the last line is important. I say, if the agent's treatment fails to respect another's dignity, it is pro tanto wrong. Those of you who are Orthodox Kantians, if there are any, should be shuddering right now. because failure to respect a person's dignity, according to Kant, is not a pro tanto wrong, it's wrong. Pro tanto means, what I mean to say here is that if someone's treatment fails to respect another's dignity, there's strong reason for concluding that it's wrong. It might, all things considered, not be wrong. This is one of the differences between my position and Kant's. Okay, so I don't have to say much about number one up there. Person ought not to use another merely as a means. Why? Well, it's not plausible to think in our cases that the person who gets the treatment is being treated merely as a means. I mean, that person wants the treatment, agrees to it, and so forth. Now, you might say, well, the person who doesn't get the treatment would be being treated or used merely as a means. But what I want to say to that is that in order to be used merely as a means, you have to be used. And in not selecting someone for treatment, we wouldn't be using that person. So the first numbered section doesn't really relate to our cases. But the second one is important. If a person treats another in some way, then she ought to treat him as having unconditional, preeminent value. What on earth does that mean? Well, I want to say that something has unconditional value only if there are no conditions, actual or possible, under which it exists but lacks positive value. So if something has unconditional value, then whenever or wherever it exists, it's got some positive value. On my account, if a particular being possesses unconditional value, this value does not vary on the basis of its intelligence or talents, if it has any. So someone who's smarter than someone else doesn't have a greater worth in this sense than the other person has. Also, the value doesn't vary on the being's instrumental value to others or its impersonal value. By impersonal value, I mean the value that an impartial, rational spectator might assign to it. And its health-related quality of life, happiness, or well-being also don't move up or down this special value or equivalently worth. This Kant-inspired account of dignity, Kidd, does not embrace the idea that if a particular being has unconditional value, then this value varies not at all. So, on my account, it's consistent with the being's having unconditional value that its value might decline. So, for example, if it treats someone else merely as a means, who commits horrific acts and so forth. Decline, but not disappear. Something has preeminent value only if no amount of anything that is not a being of that kind can have a value equal to a being of that kind. So if persons have preeminent value, then no matter how much gold or how many pretty crystal formations you have, you're not going to have as much value as you find in a person. Now, part of holding that an unconditionally valuable being has preeminent worth is to hold the following. If one treats the being in some way, this treatment ought to reflect that the being has such worth. And if the treatment also reflects that the being has or lacks or promotes or hinders anything conditionally valuable, it must be consistent with what the treatment would be if it did not also reflect this. This is just part of what it means to have preeminent value. I understand that that's a mouthful, Let me try to illustrate it with an example. Let me illustrate a case of not treating something that is unconditionally and preeminently valuable. So suppose for the sake of argument that the existing